sometimes our culture uses that term in ways that make it a little unclear what it means. So I looked it up, and I thought actually the definition that Webster gave was a really good, simple definition that we could use. Excuse me. And it says this. It says reconciliation means the restoration of friendly relations. Right? The restoration of friendly relations. So in this definition, there is implied a few things, right? One is that there's been a break in that relationship, right? That things are not good, or at least were not good at one point before they were reconciled. It also implies that the relations that come afterwards are friendly, right? That they're good. And this is where I think sometimes we get a little confused in our culture. So I'm going to assume most of us have been in fights at one point or another. We've gotten in arguments with people. You may even have had a friend or two where something happened, whether an incident or maybe even over a period of time, that broke that friendship between you. And you may be able to think of something like that. Now, how did you deal with that? Right? There's a couple of ways that we deal with it. Sometimes we get mad and we want to punish the other person for having done something and we feel like we've been wrong. And so we try to exact our punishment upon the person. But does that really heal the relationship? Not usually, right? That usually further breaks that relationship. So another thing that I see, and I see this a lot more often, is we just kind of try to ignore it and just try to move on with life. And if we're not around the person very much, then we just stop seeing the person and stop talking to the person. If we are, we learn how to just be around them, but not really with them. Right? And so you learn how to work in the same building with the person and not be fighting, but at the same time, you don't have that friendship. Right? So you're not truly reconciled. Right? Because reconcile requires that there be friendly relations at the end. And when we do that, when we ignore the wrong, when we ignore the hurt, we don't allow for that reconciliation to happen. Because that's something that's required for reconciliation. And that's the third way that this is dealt with, is when we actually deal with the hurt. Deal with the wrongdoing, whatever it might be, if it was a wrongdoing. Right? And so then the two people can come together and say, this is how I feel from this, and this is what you did that hurt me. Or, it could be the other way around, right? I know I did this, and that hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. Right? And that allows for that healing, so that then the relationship can be restored through forgiveness. And we see this with Christ. Right? So this passage that we have, it talks about God reconciling us to himself through Jesus Christ. So we see this pattern that unfolds. Right? There was a break. We had a break with our relationship with God. That's what we call sin. Right? Sin breaks our relationship with God. When we have wronged him, we have disobeyed him, we have gone against him. The Bible calls us that we were enemies of Christ. Right? We have broken that relationship. But then God says that he was working to reconcile us, right? So he didn't ignore our sin. He didn't say, well, that's okay, don't worry about that. Right? He takes our sin seriously. And he exposes our sin. And he does that through the Word. Right? He does that primarily through the law. As we read things, we've been covering the Ten Commandments in confirmation class. That's one aspect of the law. There are other commands that God gives us through the Scriptures. Right? And as we go through those and we look at that, we say, oh, I don't do that. Or I did do that. And we can start to see that's one way that God reveals to us how we have wronged him, how we have disobeyed, the sin and the hurt that's there. So he exposes that. But he doesn't expose that just to hurt us or just to wag his finger at us and punish us for it, but rather he exposes that so that we can then see Christ. Because Christ took all that sin upon himself and he bore the punishment for it. Right? He took all the guilt and all the shame of everything that we've done. And he bore it on the cross so that we could be forgiven, so that then we could be restored to friendly relations with God. Right? He was reconciling us. And that's one of the amazing things about God. Sometimes when we get into fights with people and we get mad at people and we feel like we're the ones who are wronged, right? They need to come to me. I'm not going to them. They were the one who hurt me. Right? We demand that they come to us. We demand that they do something to make this right. And yet with Christ, he did the opposite. He said, yeah, you hurt me. You were the one who wronged me, but I'm going to go to you. Because he was the one who wanted that reconciliation. He said, I'm going to go to you, and I'm going to make it right. I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to deal with it so that we can now be reconciled. We can be on friendly relations again. And I love the way that this passage finishes here. It finishes with this last sentence. It says, for our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Right? That is the gospel message right there. And what I love about it is how it starts. For our sake. And one of the things that they reminded us of over and over and over again in the seminary is that one of the primary jobs that we have as messengers of God, especially as a pastor, is to bring the for you to the message of the gospel. Right? That it's not just that Jesus died on a cross, but rather he died on a cross for you. Right? He sacrificed for you. His forgiveness is for you. Right? And that changes everything, because now it's no longer this theory, it's no longer this theology concept, but rather it's for me, right? It affects me. It's personal. It changes me. It changes me and God and how we are to make us on that friendly term. And so I love, he has that right there in that gospel message. For our sake. This is why Jesus did it. It's for you. And that is the job of a messenger of God, whether it's a pastor or as an ambassador. And guess what? We're all ambassadors. Every one of us are ambassadors. We are representatives of God to this world. So what exactly is an ambassador? What does an ambassador do? Well, I found this quote that I liked, and I forgot to write down where it's from, so I apologize for not having the source. From a book. It said, a king sends out to a city his ambassador for the purpose of announcing the decree of the king. The job of the herald is not to publish his own personal desires or to offer his own opinion about what the king has to say, but simply to speak what the king has spoken. He speaks on behalf of the king. When he speaks, the king himself is speaking. Right? And we see this in our passage, didn't we? Because he says that we have been entrusted with the message of reconciliation. It says, therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. Right? So when we are speaking those words of the gospel to people, for them, God is speaking to them through us as his ambassador. So what is an ambassador? Well, one thing is an ambassador is a citizen of the king's country. You are citizens of the kingdom of God. That is who you are. You are a citizen of the kingdom of God. You were brought into his kingdom when you received faith in Jesus Christ. You became a citizen of the king. You are also a representative of the king and his kingdom. Right? Have you ever noticed, when you look at embassies around the world, the embassy itself usually doesn't look like the rest of the country that it's in. It has a flair of its own sending nation. Right? And they speak the language of the sending nation, not usually the nation that they're in, though usually they can speak their language as well to communicate. Right? But they have that culture and all the aspects of that place that they've come from, and they live that there amidst the nation that they're at. They are a representation. So they don't just come to completely integrate themselves into that society and just blend in. They are a representation of their own culture and their own nation. An ambassador is also a messenger. So they come to bring a message. Right? And in our situations, when we have ambassadors that live over in the country, they will bring many messages. Right? They will continue to bring the message from that country. And so they are a messenger. That's one of their jobs, is to deliver the message that the king or the ruler sends. And the last thing is that they are a presence. They are a presence of that nation. They're in this other nation, and it's one that is usually one of friendship. Right? It's one where you are there seeking peace and reconciliation. That's why we send ambassadors. And that's what we see here in our passage, that we are ambassadors of reconciliation. Right? We are here to bring the presence of God for the sake of reconciliation for those people. Now, there are a few things that an ambassador is not. And sometimes it can help us to think the opposite way. What is an ambassador not? Well, an ambassador is not a permanent resident or citizen of the country that they're in. This is not your home. Right? This is not your home. Your home is with Christ. And the problem can be that when an ambassador goes to a country and they become so intermixed with that country and their culture that they forget where their home is. Right? And we can do that too. We can become so enthralled by the world and all of its trappings that we forget in the end, this really isn't our home. And we can get so consumed by our position and our status and how much money we can get and what kind of house we can get and all the different things that the world says this is what's important, that we forget it's not really why we're here. So we are not permanent residents. We are also not the one who is responsible for the content of the message. We're responsible to deliver the message, but not to decide what it says. Right? So we don't get to take the Word of God, and we don't get to take the gospel or His law or any of it and say, well, I don't like this part, I'm not going to include this part. Or, they're not going to receive this, well, I'm going to change this one a little bit, or I'm going to leave this out. We're just supposed to deliver the message. Because it is God speaking through us. Right? He is the one who is the source of the message. And it's a message that people need to hear. So we don't change the message, we don't twist the message. We also don't decide who the message is for. It's not our job to say, well, I don't think this person would really hear it. I don't think they would be receptive to it. I don't think this person would really fit in with our church, so I'm not going to bother with them. That's not what we're called to do. We're called to be ambassadors to the world, to everyone. Right? And so we are not to make that judgment that this person belongs or this person doesn't. This person will receive or this person won't. And I think sometimes we can have trouble with that. It's because of what Paul was talking about at the beginning of the message, where it said, we no longer are going to regard anybody according to the flesh. We're not going to look at all the outward appearances and all the things of the world and say, well, I'm just going to judge based off of those things how we're going to think about you. We did that with Christ. We thought, oh, here's this guy. If you watch, or if you read through the Bible, you notice that the disciples continually are amazed by Jesus. Like it will say that Jesus does something, and it says they all believed and were amazed. And they believed that He was the Son of God. And then the next chapter, He does something else, and they're like, oh, He really is the Son of God. Didn't you discovered that like a few days ago? They continually, right, get trapped in regarding Him according to, He's just the guy. He looked, he was a human being. And he was with them, and so it was very easy for them to regard Him according to the flesh. Here's this person. And you see Him in the weakness of a human instead of in the divinity of Christ and His godness. And they were continually reminded of that and surprised by that because they kept regarding him in the flesh. And we often regard each other according to the flesh, according to appearances, according to the standards of the world. So I have a little quiz for you. I thought I'd have a little fun with you here today. We have a little quiz. This one's going to involve some slides here. Here's the way that the quiz is going to work. Do you have it there?
Where did you put it?
It was in the most recent version of it. Tell you what, we'll bring it up.
I don't know what.
You might have pulled up the wrong one. Where's this? Let's see if we can do this real quick. Oh, there we go. All right. Probably should just scroll to it, but oh, this is a much faster service when we do it this way.
I don't know if we could sing that quick though.
I'm right.
Can you read it all? Did you get it all? All right, there we go. Okay, so here's the way it works. We're going to have 3 slides. Each of them have 4 pictures of people. Can you see it, or should I turn out the light? Can you see it well enough? Do the light? All right. There we go. All right. So here's the question. You're to look at these pictures and decide which one of these people are members of a Lutheran church. All right. I could have gone with Christian, but I thought it's very varied. It makes it too hard. So which one of these are members of a Lutheran church? So think in your mind. Look at the pictures.
Just one.
Is it just one?
You just have to decide who you think is a member of the Lutheran church. Okay? Everyone got an answer in their head? Okay, let's go to the second slide. You only have 3 to remember, so just remember your answers. All right, so we have 4 more people here. Take a look at them. Which ones are members of Lutheran churches? Okay, let's do one more slide. All right, here's the last one. Good, everyone got an answer? All right, I'm turn on the light. There we go. All right, so which ones in the first slide, or which one in the first slide?
Is there only one in the first slide?
Now see, that's the trick. You guys were already catching on, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was all of them. That's right. Now, if you're really into the LCMS, you might recognize this guy. He's the current president of the LCMS. So yeah, every single one of these people that we see here, right? These are all members of Lutheran churches. So even the guy getting the tattoo, right? Member of a Lutheran church. Guy in prison, member of a Lutheran church. Various races, various ages, various positions of life.
Okay, I seriously failed. The only one I thought that wasn't was the pastor, because Wisconsin Synod ministers didn't wear the white. So I'm like, okay, Lutherans don't wear the little white things, so priests do. So I failed.
Well, some of us do, some of us don't, right? So if you're only seeing me, you're like, well, who's that guy? What is he doing there? Right? And then if you've been Lutheran for a while, you're probably looking at the guy over on the left going, we don't raise our hands. What is he doing?
That's actually probably one of the youth gatherings.
It's actually a picture from the Cross Mount Dora, like where that one was from. And also it's the one where the guy who was getting the tattoo, they were the ones where the pastor just on a whim said that he would be willing to pay for anyone to get the church's logo tattooed on them. And he had like 5 people afterward come up and say, were you serious? Because we'll do that. He was like, I really hadn't thought about it. It was just kind of an off-the-cuff comment, but they did. Yeah, so some of those C's may be familiar, some of those are not. This is actually the head of our Black ministry outreach, is what his his roles. But the point is, right, all different ages, all different races, different nationalities that we saw out there, different positions in life, different economic situations, and yet God called all of them. Right? And the trouble that we run into is when we start looking at people and saying, well, not that person. You know, that person was in prison, or that person's still in jail, you know, and they did it. Okay, well, guess what? They need Christ just like we do.
They reconcile.
Exactly.
Yes.
He reconciled every one of those people. They need it. Every one of us need it. Right? And so he is reconciling all of us. We're not to try to decide who it is that he wants to reconcile. Rather, we bring that message, right? We are the ambassadors, and we bring that message to the people. And we let God do what God does. He changes people's hearts. He changes people's minds. And it's just like he's done with us. In fact, sometimes we have trouble even with ourselves. Right? As we look in the mirror, seeing that we too are that new creation. That we have been reconciled. Sometimes we look at ourselves according to the flesh. Right? But Christ doesn't. He looks at us according to what Jesus has done. According to who he created and recreates. And continues to make us this new creation. And so it's important for us to remember that for ourselves. The for you is for you too. And it's also for each one of those people out there. That Christ died for all of them. That he became sin who knew no sin for them, so that they could become the righteousness of Christ. So I have some homework for you this week. We have tests and homework. This is like a school week right now. And Melissa didn't write this sermon. So here's what your homework is. Okay? As ambassadors, I want to encourage you to sit down at some point, preferably earlier in the week, so we don't forget. If we say we're going to do it on Friday, we won't ever do it. Right? So tonight, tomorrow, sometime soon, take a little while to pray and consider some people who you know that don't know Christ. Or maybe they know Christ and they have no church home. And make a list and begin praying for them. Pray for them every day. And pray for them, pray for them to be able to come to know Christ, or to be able to find a church home, but also for you as an ambassador to them to be able to see those opportunities to bring that message of reconciliation to them and to be able to act in those moments. Right? Sometimes we get a little nervous about those things. That's one of the important things about remembering that the ambassador is not the one responsible for what the message says, or even the effect of it. Right? That's what the Holy Spirit does. He works in the hearts of people. But I want to encourage you to make a list. At least 5 people, if you would. If you want to make it longer than that, you can make it longer than that. But make it a list that of people that you will pray for, and then pray about the opportunities that you might have to be able to be an ambassador to those people. Can you do it?